crimson silk. The rain outside painted silver trails across the glass, the city below flickering with restless lights. Inside the penthouse, shadows pooled in every corner, the only glow coming from the warm amber lamp near Cook's chair. He sat there like a carved statue, broad shoulders under a black silk shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, veins shifting along his forearms as he turned a crystal glass between his fingers. His face was cut from ice, jaw set, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the glass window. That was his mood tonight, distant, untouchable, and the kind of cool that didn't just freeze but warned you not to get close. And your name? She didn't listen to his warnings. She stood at the far end of the room, framed by the dark hallway she had just stepped out from. The deep crimson saree she wore clung to her like molten temptation, the pallu sliding off one shoulder to reveal the smooth line of her collarbone, her waist bare between the blouse and pleats, caught the soft lamp light, a quiet dare wrapped in silk, her hair loosely pinned let a few strands fall along her cheek, the soft chim of her anklet cut through the heavy quiet as she stepped forward. Cook didn't turn his head, his voice low and even, brushed the air. Is there reason you dress like that? Your lips curved faintly, maybe. He took a slow sip from the glass, still refusing to meet her eyes. The stubborn self-control of his was infuriating. She moved closer, the scent of jasmine following her steps, until she was standing at the edge of his space, close enough that a shadow fell across his lap. Look at me, Cook, she said softly. I am, he murmured, without lifting his gaze from the drink. Just not the way you want me to. Her eyes narrowed. He was resisting her again. It had been weeks since they touched beyond the occasional brush of hands. Weeks of him retreating into his walls, and tonight she was done letting him hide them. She let her fingers trail along the back of the chair, slowly circling behind him. You think you can keep ignoring me forever? She whispered, leaning close enough that her breath grazed his ear. His shoulder tensed, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping still. And then, in a move that was more instant than thought, she came around in front of him and slid into his lap. The glass in his hands clinked against the table as he set it down, but still, his hands stayed at his sides. You're testing me, he said finally. Was her for now? Maybe I'm reminding you, she breathed, her fingers playing with the buttons of his collar. The hair between them turned heavy, the kind that made every sound sharper, every heartbeat louder. He stared at her now, his gaze dropping briefly to the bare skin where her blouse ended, then back to her face with a warning edge. You have no idea what you're doing, he said. I know exactly what I'm doing, she countered, leaning in until her lips almost brushing his. That was the first crack in him, his hand shot out, fingers gripping her waist, pulling her flesh against him in a way that made her breath itch. His grip tightened at her waist, the kind of hold that didn't hurt but warned her she was no longer in control of the moment. Don't, he said, though his voice was already betraying him, lower, heavier, threaded with something dangerous. She tilted her head, eyes locked on his. The what? The silence between them cracked in one shift move. Cook rose from the chair, taking her with him. Her feet barely touched the ground before her back met the cool wall behind her. His palm pressed beside her head, the other still anchored firmly to her waist. The dim lamplight carved sharp lines across his face, shadowing the heat in his gaze. You keep walking into fire, he said quietly, his forehead lowering until it almost brushing hers. And you keep acting like you don't burn, she whispered back. His jaw ticked. That single sentence pulled him tighter than her hands ever could. He could smell as perfume, light, sweet, but dangerous because it made him think of skin, heat, and the silk that clung to her like the second skin. She moved her hand to his shirt, her fingertips tracing the open edge where the top buttons hung. And his chest rose beneath her touch, the muscle beneath warm and firm. She felt the way he swallowed, as if holding back the words he didn't want to say. Still pretending? She murmured, leaning just enough, the tip of her nose brushing his jaw. The sand left the wall and caught her chin, tilting her face up. You don't get to decide when I break. The way he said it, cold but laced with restraint, sent a shiver through her. She met his stare unblinking. Then maybe I will keep pushing until you do. Something snapped in his eyes. The tension that had been stretched so tight between them suddenly pulled them together. His mouth didn't climb hers, not yet, but his body closed the space, his chest pressing against hers, pinning her harder into the wall. Her pulse drummed in her ears. She was winning. She could feel it, but he was still holding back. He leaned close, his lip at her ear, and his breath sent heat down her neck. You think wearing this? His fingers brushed the pallu of his saree. Is enough to undo me? Her smile was low. You're already undone. He laughed once, short, low, dangerous, and stepped back suddenly, as if yanking himself from a cliff edge. She almost stumbled forward without his hold. The, the wall cold again where his feet had been. Go to bed, he said, turning away, his tongue flat but not steady. She didn't move, no. He froze mid-step, the single refusal wrapped around the room like smoke. Slowly he turned his head to look at her over his shoulder. His eyes darkened. Careful, Yonton. She took a slow step toward him, the silk of his saree whispering with each moment. Or what? Cook's gaze dropped to her mouth, then lower a flash of vulnerability before his control slammed back into place. But she had seen it. She knew she was breaking him. Sit down, he said. Make me, she murmured. His hand twitched. She was playing with fire and she wanted the burn. Cook's stare lingered on her for a moment too long before he finally turned away, heading for the sleek mahogany desk at the far end of the room. His steps were steady, calculated, but his shoulders were taut, the kind of tension that didn't just go away. He sank into the leather chair, pulling a stack of papers towards him, as if acting of walking could erase the heat still clinging to his skin. She followed without a word. The soft pad of her bare feet against the polished floor made his pen pass with mid-stroke. He didn't look up. You're in my way, he said evenly, flipping a page. I'm not touching anything, she countered, her voice light but her finger resting against the desk edge just close, that his arm brushed them when he reaches for his glass. He set the pen down with a faintly, what do you want, your name? She leaned forward, the edge of the desk pressing into her hips, her face dipping into his line of sight. You. His eyes flickered up, cold and sharp, but underneath there was a faintest crack, the kind only she would notice. I'm busy, he said, his voice slipped. She smiled slow and knowing. Not for long. Before he could respond, she rounded the table, coming to stand behind him. The sari brushed his arm as she leaned down, one hand braced on the leather chair, the other trailing across the back of his neck. He stilled, every muscle going tight under the touch. You smell like trouble, he muttered low enough that it wasn't meant to be here. I'm worse than trouble, she whispered back. Her fingers slipped to his collar, toying with the first button. His breath shifted sharper now. He caught her wrist before she could go further. Stop. Why? She asked, her lips dangerously close to his heart. Because you don't know what happens when I don't. The words were heavy, threaded with a warning she heard before, but this time she wasn't back away. Then show me, she breathed. Something in him gave away in one shift move. He pushed the chair back, stood the arm that had been holding her wrist, sliding down to her waist, pulling her flush against him. The desk was behind her now, the hard edge pressing into her spine as his hands pinned there, one at her hip, the other flat at the desk beside her. Her pulse was a wild drum, his gaze held her, dark and dangerous, before dropping to her mouth again. He didn't kiss her, not yet. He wanted her to feel the space between them, wanting and having the torture of it. You have been playing with matches all night, he said softly, his thumb brushing the bare skin of her waist. Don't be surprised when you catch fire. Her voice was steady, but her heart wasn't. Burn me then. The air between them thickened, each breath sharp enough to cut. His hands still rested on her waist, the heat of his palms searing through the thin silk. She stood shifted slightly against the desk, the move subtle but enough to send the pallu of her saree sliding lower over his shoulder. It slipped for the silk, falling against her arm until the neckline of her blouse dipped, bearing more of her chest. The warm lamplight kissed her skin, turning every curve into temptation. Her eyes locked on his, dark, sharp, and unreadable, but his breathing gave him away. It was heavier now, each exhale dragging a fraction longer than the last. He leaned closer, his lips almost brushing hers, and she could feel the ghost of his breath, warmth, deliberate teasing. But his hands, betrayed her. They roamed the edges of her waist, her hip, even the curve of her back, squeezing just enough to make her shiver, but never touching where she needed it most. It was infuriating, torturous. Her finger curled against her shirt, her nails dragging lightly down the fabric. Cook, she warned, a voice mix of frustration and want. Is only He only smiled faintly, his gaze dropping to her lips before traveling down the line of her neck, slow and deliberate, his thumb brushing the bare skin just under her ribs, but still nothing more. Still pretending your control? She asked, her tongue sharpening. His eyes flickered back up to hers, calm, maybe I am. Her anger flat, sharp, and hot. You think this is the game? That's when he saw it, the spark he loved the most, her rage, even wrapped in silk, even with her hair loose and her saree slipping scandalously loud. She was fire, and it was beautiful. Something in his stare changed, the cool restraint replaced by a hunger that made her pulse stutter. It was the kind of look that could make a woman fear for something far more dangerous than pain. Before she could take another breath, his hand clamped to her veins, pinning her from the desk and pressing her back against the nearest wall. The thud of impact echoed softly in the room, his body caged her in, his palm flat against the wall beside her head, the other gripping her hips so hard she could feel the press of each finger. Cook, she whispered, his lips hovered over us, close enough that she could taste the whiskey on his breath. You have no idea what you just asked for. His voice was steady. Then show me. The wall was cold against her back, but Cook's body blocked most of it, his heat wrapping around her in a way that made escape impossible, not that she wanted to escape. His hand slid from her hip to the side of her thigh, the fabric of her saree bunching beneath his fingers, knuckles grazing the bare skin there. Her breath itched and his gaze caught it. He standed close his lips, just barely brushing the curve of her cheek as he spoke. You have been begging for this all night, he murmured, voice so low it vibrated against her skin. Her finger gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, but his weight against her was already climbing every inch. She could feel the tension in his body like he was the one breathing away from losing control completely. Then, in a move as sudden as the rain against the window, his free hand caught the edge of her slipping pillow and dragging it the rest of the way down, letting the crimson silk pool uselessly at her elbow. The exposed curve of her blouse rose and fell with each sharp breath, and his eyes, dark, consuming, tracked it like a predator watching prey. Cook, she started, but the word melted into a gasp when his hand caught the slide of her jaw, tilting her face up. His lips coasted over hers, barely touching, his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. Say it, he demanded softly. She blinked up at him, caught in the gravity of his stare. Say what? That you want this. I won't any. I don't need to say it. She shot back, the fire in her voice matching the pounding in her chest. His mouth curved into something between a smirk and a growl. That's what I like to hear about you. And then he finally closed the space, not with a soft kiss, but with a rough press of lip that made her head hit the wall behind her. His hand at her jaw deepened the angle, the other sliding to the small of her back and pulling her against him so tightly there was no air left between them. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was climbing a punishment and a reward all at once. When he pulled back just enough to breathe, his forehead rested against hers. His voice was rough, now unsteady. You have no idea how close I was walking away tonight. Her lips parted, still flushed from his. And now? Now I'm not letting you walk away at all, he whispered. The wall still pressed cold at her back, but it didn't matter. Cook's body was all she could feel. His chest rose hard against hers, his breath brushing her lips in uneven waves, his gaze locked on her like she was the only thing in the world worth ruining himself for. Without warning, his grip shifted, sliding from her jaw to the back of her neck, his finger tangling in the loose strands of her hair. The move wasn't gentle. He tilted her head back just enough for his mouth to climb the hollow of her throat, his breath hot against the skin there. Her hands twisted in his shirt, dragging him closer, but he won't chuckle low against her neck, still impatient. You are the one who started this, she shot back, a voice catching when his lips hovered just above her collarbone, close enough to set her skin alight, yet never giving her what she wanted. The teasing restraint lasted only a second before he stepped back just enough to spin her, his hand still at her waist as he steered her toward the desk. The edge met her thighs, and in one swift motion he lifted her into it. The cool wood under her palms grounded her, but Cook's heat erased it instantly. He stood between her knees now, one hand braced on the desk beside her, the other sliding from her hip to the lower back, pulling her towards him. Her sari had shifted again, the silk pulling dangerously low, the blouse straining with each breath. His eyes dipped just once before meeting hers again with a look that made her pulse stumble. You really think you can play with me and win? He asked, a voice dark velvet that promised nothing safe. I'm not here to win, she said. I'm here to see you lose control. His jaw flexed. That was all it took. The chair behind the desk cracked slightly as he stepped back, but it wasn't retreat, it was strategy. He caught her by the wrist and pulled her down from the desk, guiding her until she was standing in front of the chair. Sit, he ordered. Her brows lifted, and if I don't? His lips curved, dangerous and amused. Then I will make you. She didn't move. The standoff between them was electric, every second pulling the tension higher, and then, with a single step forward, he closed the distance, his hand gripping her waist as he turned and pushed her gently but firmly down into the chair. His frame loomed over her now, his hands braced on either side of the armrest, cadging her in. The storm outside flickered light across his face, making the hunger in his eyes look even sharper. Now you're not going anywhere, he murmured, her lips curved. Wasn't planning to. His laugh was low, rough, the sound of a man who knew he had her exactly where he wanted. The storm outside rattled against the glass, but inside the only sound was the faint itch in her breathing. Cook's frame boxed her into the chair, his hands gripping the armrest like he owned not just the seat, but the woman in it. Her knees brushed against his thigh, the closeness stealing all sense of spaces. He leaned down slowly, his shadow falling over her, his eyes locked on her like he was memorizing every flicker of defiance. You have been asking for this all night, he murmured, his voice low and threaded with heat, and now you're not moving until I say so. Her voice curved faintly, her lips curved faintly. Then make me regret it? That was the push she needed. His hand slid from the armrest to the side of her face, thumb brushing her cheek before trailing down the line of her jaw. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and the weight of it made her pulse stutter. He bent lower, his lips hovering a breath away from her, so close she could feel the warmth, taste the faint trace of whiskey on the hair, but instead of closing the gap, he moved her here, his voice quite threat. You have no idea how badly I want to ruin you right now. Her breath caught, then stopped talking. The smirk that touched his mouth was dangerous. Careful, I will take that as permission. Before she could even answer, his hand at her face shifted to the back of her neck, pulling her forward into the kiss that was anything but gentle. It was a collision, heat and hunger, and the sharp edge of all the restraint he'd been holding back. Her hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, but he was already closing every inch between them. When he broke the kiss just enough to break his forehead rested against hers, Stormlight painted his eyes darker. Hungry, you're mine, he said, not as a question but as a fact. Her chest rose and fell against his. I was always yours. A slow smile curved his lips, not soft, but the kind that promised that this was the only beginning. He straightened just enough to look down at her, his thumb brushing the silk of her shoulder. Good, because after tonight I'm not letting you test me like this without consequences. The weight of his words hung heavy between them, but she didn't look away. She just held his gaze and the barest hint of challenge in her eyes, and he loved it. Outside the rain kept falling, inside Cook's shadow stayed over her, his hands still on the chair as if even the storm couldn't pull him away.